I'm very, very excited to welcome Shelley Von Strunkel, who I am sure many of you already know. So Shelley is a famous astrologer, has written many regular horoscope columns over the years, as well as books, and is regularly interviewed by mainstream media. I remember years ago when I regularly commuted into central London on the tube, my highlight used to be reading my horoscope in the Evening Standard every day. It was a bit of fun for me. I only really started to realise over the last few years how interesting astrology is when I delved into my own birth chart. So Shelley will talk to us today about how illuminating these birth charts can be and what they actually mean and how to interpret them. So it's going to be very enlightening for us all. And I'm really excited actually to have you here, Shelley, because those years ago I used to read your columns in the Evening Standard. I never thought for a minute that we'd be on together on Zoom with this lovely audience now. How weird things are. So welcome. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you.
And is it my turn now?
It is your turn.
Well, let me say hello, everybody. It's so nice to meet you. I suspect I've met a few of you here and there, but it's lovely to connect with you today. And what I'm going to do is take you on a kind of quick tour of astrology and how it is, because most people only know it from the star sign columns, ones that I write. I used to write in the Sunday Times. By the way, I didn't quit. They fired me in their wisdom. Go figure. And in the Standard, and also if you read Chinese in China Vogue, if you read French in French Vogue. But let me just do a quick background for you to understand where I'm coming from. Just to show I was meant to do something like this, I was born in Hollywood. So I didn't do their kind of stars, I did this kind of stars. And when I was a kid in LA, I was a real kind of spiritual nerd. So I studied, actually, I didn't start studying astrology. I studied spirituality and read about it and was fascinated by Eastern thought, Western thought, studied Buddhism, studied Hinduism. Not so much to become one, but I wanted to understand all of the different approaches to the divine. And I went to some place called the Vedanta Society in Hollywood, which is one of the oldest places to study all faiths. And then when I kind of grew up, I went into the kind of thing that anyone who's into spirituality is. I went into retail. And in fact, in my 20s, I was in retailing and a buyer. And the reason this is relevant is I had to work with the general public. And I've really discovered, I mean, there's no better way to discover how different people are than on the sales floor and trying to find someone something they want to wear. Someone comes in and you say, how about this? Oh my God, I'd never wear that. The next person comes in and says, oh my God, it's what I've been looking for. You quickly understand that people have a different take on life. And at the same time, I began to study astrology. And that's about people having a different take on life. So I actually began to study what astrology was about in studying fashion, the history of fashion, and retail. And then astrology began to confirm it. So that's my background. So I'm coming to you, not just having studied astrology with a teacher, but having studied it basically on the hoof in stores. And I worked with private clients for many, many years. And then I realized there was this huge gap. This is the marketer in me, between proper astrology and the kind of stuff I would do with clients and what the public was getting. And I thought, well, it can't be doing with this. So through various connections, I did my first column in a magazine called Mirabella in the States. And I did that, the whole notion being to connect people with everyday life and astrology. It was a monthly column. And someone called Patrick Walker, who you may have heard of, read that and invited me for a visit. And it was my interview to take over from him at the Evening Standard, which I did in 1991. and I'm still there. So that's kind of how I got into it. So that's the me bit. Now, the astrology bit. Astrology is very, very simple. It's the study of cycles. Except in this particular study, we're not looking at the cycles on Earth, we're looking at the cycles in the heavens. And unfortunately, I can't see you all, but a nod would do. How many of you keep track of the cycle of the moon? From the new moon, yeah, cool, to the full moon. Okay, that's the beginning of what humanity was watching. Because when people began to settle in the river valleys, they had to keep track of that because it controlled when the river would flood or not. And then as they were looking at that, they began to also notice these persistent, what seemed stars, but they weren't stars. And they moved across a small band rather than in the heavens. And they were the planets. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then they began to relate events with the positions of the planets. So that when Mars, the red one, which became associated with the god of war, tangled with Mercury, the communication one, people would bicker. Or, as is the case now, when Jupiter, which is the planet of expansion, and Saturn, which is business, got together, then there would be argy-bargy, there would be arguments in business. It was all about what was going on around them. And most of it initially was about planting. It was about paying attention to when things would grow. And in fact, still today, we have many traditions about when to plant. In fact, I don't know if you know this one, about both cutting your hair or cutting the lawn. If you cut them between the new moon and the full moon, they'll grow faster. Because of course it's expanding. And if you cut them between the full moon and the new moon, where by tradition the pace slows down, then your lawn one grows fast. But if you don't want your hair to grow as fast, you do it with that timing. So the tradition of timing your life goes way, way, way back. However, because people actually didn't record when they were born, the whole sun sign thing, and even stars for an individual didn't exist. And they only began to be of importance when the kings or queens, but mostly kings in those days, were born, and they recorded their birth time. But then the astrologer would be asked if they were going to, well, plant, but also have the odd war, when to start that. And so we went from simply noticing the growth or not, from planning crops, from setting dates for wars, to the odd person who would be, his birth date would be noted, who would be usually the ruler. Birth charts, as we know them, are relatively recent because people's births weren't recorded until the 1800s. I was just doing some research on this for an article that's running in the Mail on Sunday in early December. And the birth charts, like we're talking about today, individuals are quite recent. Now, again, they were done for rulers. In fact, in a play done by Webster, who lived about the same time as Shakespeare, called The Duchess of Malfi, the turning point in the play is the discovery of a birth chart of a child. So it was ordinary enough then, in about 1550, that it could be a turning point in a play. But the idea of an individual having a life that you would look at was like, so, and as we know from history, we've gone from people just kind of living a life to now each of us viewing our own lives as a journey, which is a pretty exciting way to do it. And one of the reasons I moved from seeing private clients, which is what I did in LA and then eventually in LA and New York, and then in LA, New York, and London, into media, is I wanted more members of the public to be aware of this amazing tool. And that's kind of why we're doing this. And so what I've encouraged all of you to do is to have your chart done. And now I'm going to explain the two of that. And I'm going to show you, if you haven't had yours done, This is one that's printed. You can order it online, or if you get the printed one with a shiny cover. But what it is in fact your birth chart. This happens to be Prince Harry's. And what it is literally a map of the heavens. I know you're going, what's going to happen to him and her? I wouldn't touch it. So what this is literally is a map of the heavens for a moment in time. So our old Prince Harry was born at 4:20 p.m. in London on September 15th. Now let me just see, I'm going to hold this up fairly close, how good you guys are as astrologers, because you held it up really close. Can you guess which thing is the sun? Which figure is the sun? I'll give you a hint. That one. That's the symbol for the sun. And his sun was in the sign of Virgo. Now, the moon is the key to the emotional nature and to your mother. The moon in his chart, I want to make it really close. Can you see the little line symbol? So literally, a chart is a map of the heavens for a moment in time. Now, if you've received yours, you will have received something like this, probably on your computer, because most people just order them computerized. And you'll have received here, and this is an example. I didn't send it to Prince Harry. No, it's an example. You will have received an interpretation. Now, this is the fun part. This is a really interesting part, because in having this, you're taking a journey from reading the Evening Standard, if you read it, reading your daily stars on my website, if you do that, and if you don't, I welcome you to it, and actually beginning your own personal journey with these energies, these beings called the planets. Now, the funny thing is, and I was just writing this article for You Magazine, which is running, as I said, on Sunday, the 5th of December. Each heavenly body, each planet symbolizes a part of ourselves, and the sun is us, right? The sun is moi. So the sign the sun is in is kind of your signature. And it's kind of like being a New Yorker, a Londoner, someone from Hollywood, a Texan. It's a component of your archetype, but all of the other planets signify a part of your nature. And this is what's interpreted in the chart. So I showed you Harry's chart. Here's another fun one to look at, just for fun. This is this amazing woman, Jacinda Ardern, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who is just a whiz bang, amazing woman. Now, there are two reasons I'm showing you this, because it's fascinating. I'll tell you some points about her, which will make it easier for you to understand your own chart. But she's a Leo. And you don't find that many Leos in politics, because honestly, it is a sign that rather enjoys the theatrical side of life. However, Obama's a Leo too. And they both have that amazing, compelling quality as leaders. They don't just lead, they draw the public with them into their opinions. And I'm going to compare, and we're not doing politics here, so I'm only just going to compare these, because there's another pair of two people in politics who are quite similar. And I'm just going to mention it because they're similar, we're not discussing them. One is called Boris Johnson, and the other is called Trump. They're both Geminis. They even have the same haircut. So when we're talking about sun signs, we're talking about archetypes. And in politics, it's great because you know them instantly, and you know that. So when we're talking about your sun sign as we are in your chart, that's a part of you. But when you look at your chart, which you've ordered, you will then read about the other components. And this is where it gets really exciting. But the reason I wanted to talk to you is it can also be a bit of a journey, because we're not used to thinking beyond that. You'll be at chatting, and you'll be with a friend or maybe at a dinner party when we used to be able to go to them. And you'll be talking about someone and say, oh, are you a Virgo too? Yes, isn't it like this and that? And you can agree. But your own chart is your own personal journey. And when you read about it yourself in it, you might at first find it a little confusing because it takes you to specific parts of your life and your nature that you're not used to thinking about in that way. For instance, Mercury is a planet associated with communication. So let's say you're, Jacinda there, or Barack Obama, a Leo. If you're a Leo, your Mercury, communication, can be in the sign of Cancer, Leo, or Virgo. The reason it can only be in the signs nearby is because Mercury is the planet nearest the sun. And because the zodiac goes all the way around and Mercury is right near the sun, it can only be in the signs nearest your sign. So while the Leo characteristic is very much there, in each individual Leo, how you communicate, Mercury, communication, could be in one of three signs. That's one of the reasons you have your chart done. And if you're looking at your chart and reading it, you'll read that it says your Mercury is in this sign. It indicates this. And as you read the chart, you go through each one of these. And it's a bit of a journey into what makes you tick. Now, again, the reason I'm talking about this is it's like experiencing a new side of yourself and maybe going into a component of yourself that's like, God, I don't really understand this. Well, hey guys, that's the point. This is like a journey into a new way of discovering yourself. And often people have said to me, they will have looked at their chart and read it the first time, and they'll have gone through it and gone, yeah, well, it says like this is the one for Harry. The planets Venus and Mars are combining in your chart, indicating that you seek a stimulating and romantic relationship. Well, he did that, didn't he? Actually, and this is why it works, by the way. No, I did not plan this, but my God in heaven, isn't that true? So it's quite good, isn't it? So that's the way it works. The chart looks at the positions of the planet in your own birth chart and not only concludes how you are, but also talks about how you function. Now, because this particular, and it's just one sentence I happened to turn to, honestly, I did not set this up, that it was Prince Harry or that this, but this is how it works. Each planet represents an element of your character. So Mercury is communication. Venus is relationships, but it's also your self-esteem and what you earn and what you own. It's your sense of yourself, but also the self that relates and how you relate and what you want. Mars is passion. It's the passion about life. It's about getting things done. It's about the causes in your life. If you're an athlete, the kind of things you enjoy. When you put Venus, love, and Mars together in a chart and you look at them, then you get an interpretation. And in this particular case, the chart said, it's imprint. I did not do this. That Venus and Mars combining in a chart indicates seeking a stimulating and romantic relationship. You're charming, assertive, passionate, and alive, and admire these qualities in a potential intimate partner. It does work, this stuff. So each of those phrases, when you read your chart, will apply to you. But we're sitting here looking at Harry's chart now that he's married. Think of it 5 years ago. This wouldn't have applied yet. So when you're reading your own chart, I want you to think of two things. One is not all of it will necessarily have become part of your life, or, and this is the interesting bit, it may well be that that's true. You may have the passionate relationship, but you don't realize it. You may have the work you adore, but you don't realize it because you have the habit of complaining based on perhaps what you heard at home. So as you read your chart, you will find some things like click and go, wow, gosh, I never thought of that way. But other things you'll go, I don't know, I just like don't relate to that. And it's possible that you won't. There's certain things that may not make sense. The chart is only a mirror of your energy. And humans are contrary creatures, and we do have free will. However, this is a mirror. Notice I say mirror. This is a mirror of your energies. From my point of view, the chart is a mirror of the energy your soul chose to come in with. And this is why we look at it. There's an old-fashioned way of looking at it saying the chart tells you who you're going to be. And I'm too bloody-minded to go with that one. It's, bloody-minded American, grow up on the West Coast kind of thing. To me, the reason we study this is to look in the mirror. And, like if we've all had this happen, you look in the mirror and think, oh my God, I really need a haircut. The mirror tells you stuff. Well, this is a different kind of mirror. And it's a mirror that says, these are your potentials. Now, if old Prince Harry read this 5 years ago, he might have been encouraged in his relationships. In every case, therefore, not everything in your chart will necessarily have become reality, or, and this is the other part of it, you have to understand it's a journey, it may not have become reality yet. Or it may be, in this particular case, if the chart says you have the capacity to enjoy a rich creative life, you have the capacity to develop new work in the middle of your life, you have the capacity to have a close relationship with family. And from your point of view, you ain't got the close relationship with family, you ain't got the work you love. Well, then maybe, as would have been the case with Prince Harry, if he read this 5 years ago, it's because you're not there yet. Because this is a mirror of your soul's choices for this life. But hey, you can't do it all at once. I mean, my chart shows writing. And indeed, I've just finished a book and I'm starting another one, by the way. I didn't start doing that until I was 40. I did charts. I was in retailing. That also shows. So the chart doesn't show everything at once. And so when you read about you, read about it from 2 points of view. One is where you stand now. Well, actually 3. One is where you stand now. One is what you read about and you think, I always meant to do that. I never got around to it. Maybe now is the time. And the other part is if you're reading and going, I just don't know about this. I mean, like, this is so not me. Okay, it may be the planets are wrong. Or it may be it's a part of you haven't met yet. Because there's a little bit of a tendency for us to think, well, I am the way I am, and you are the way you are. But I mean, how awful it would be if wherever you are now, that was it, babe. You weren't ever going to learn nothing new. Ooh, my God. And evermore, this is the thing. And this is one of the reasons why the study of birth charts is so useful now, because even 20 years ago, 40 years ago, people were born into the country they were born into. They were born into the class they were born into. They were born into the family, the religion they were born into. And that was that. I mean, they were born in one particular gender. Now you can change that too. So life is very much a journey. So that if your chart says this is part of your nature and you haven't met it yet, it may indeed be because you haven't met it yet. So instead of this being a fixed analysis of you, which you either fit into or don't, and you look at it and you go, oh, well, that's wrong, completely wrong. You have a think about it. I've had people come to me as, say, private clients, which I do very privately. You guys are allowed to apply to be a private client, but I just don't let the public know because, I love the public, but I don't necessarily want to work with them one by one. but because you come to me via Stella, you qualify. So if you want a private one-to-one consultation, we can do that. And there was a woman who I did a private consultation for, and I record them always. And she went away going, a very serious version, a New Yorker version of, I don't know, lady, I don't know, this, I don't know. And I ran into her on the street 5 years later, and she said, okay, fine, you were right. When can I come back? And she was like so invested in, no, I'm not like that. No, not part of my life. Who the hell do you think you are, a woman? Oh. This is a weird reason I record the consultations, because it took her that long to get around to going, I don't know, maybe. And then I had to run into her in the street. So that's the other part to understand about your chart, but also because the point of doing this is to give you a tool in life. And this is meant to be a springboard. So my investment in encouraging you to read this, and by the way, I didn't write it. This was written by a woman, a colleague, who is also a fellow journalist and astrologer, who owns her own computer company. And I looked all over the world for decent ones. And this is the only one I would ever use, because she is a brilliant astrologer and a brilliant writer, and she knows her stuff. So, and God knows I wouldn't have the patience to do a computer program that says Venus for all 12 signs, Mars for all 12 signs, Mercury for all 12 signs, and then fit it into prose. God bless her. And she's done it brilliantly. So the reason I encourage this is it's one of the best tools to help you go on the journey I just described. So while the temptation is to look at it and say, yeah, that makes sense. And the other person's like, that's totally wrong. Well, as I said, if Prince Harry read this 5 years ago, he would have gone, I don't see any romantic babe. It's wrong. So the point of this is we are all on that journey. And that journey is part of the learning process, recognizing that. You can't have everything you want at the same time. We only got 24 hours in every day. And that's the part that has to do with actually having your chart done. And I'm not selling it as a thing, but it's a difference. This is a chart which is a map of the heavens for the moment you were born, and really talks about your nature and what, from my point of view, your soul designed for you to do. So that we wouldn't just be sitting around filing our nails, but so it's part of your journey. But obviously you can't do everything at once. If, on the other hand, you are confused about this moment, then you can also order a yearly interpretation, which is what's going on with the planets. Or, as I said, do a private consultation, which is about an hour. And that then fine-tunes the process. And if you're thinking, yeah, but my chart says I'm going to do something really creative, I'm stuck here doing accounting. Not to say that accounting isn't creative, and if you're accountants, I apologize, but you know what I mean. It's not oil painting. So if you feel stuck, then there may be another step to take. And this, again, is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because we go from the daily and weekly stars and monthly stars that I write to the book. Now, the book is another thing, and this it sounds like I'm selling the book, and actually I'm a little bit, but I'm rather proud of it. This is called the Birthday Book, and it's another kind of astrology, because what it is, first of all, it's so beautifully designed. Dorleen Kindersley came to me asking to do it, and like, here's what the page for Aries looks like. I know, how cool is that? Gorgeous. And then there is a page for each day. And the reason the editor, she's a commissioning editor for Dorleen Kindersley, came to me and said she had an old version of this book at home, and every time people would come over, everyone would sit down and look at the book and read about each other. So she said, you know, Now, this is the reason I mentioned it is, yes, it's just out and it's great and you can buy it through all of the normal places. But also, it's another stage in this journey of astrology, because there's a tendency to think all there is the stuff in the newspaper per star sign. And often that's important. In fact, one of the reasons I'm so aware of it is on the days when I took the underground frequently, several times I've been on the underground and I've seen someone not just open the standard, but like tear the standard open to read my column. And it's just so touching. But then I also realized one of the reasons that they're so passionate about it, they do that, is for many people, and this won't be the case for you guys because you guys hang out with Stella, so already you have a very much more enriched life. But for many people, this sounds weird. Reading my column in the Evening Standard is the most reflective moment of their whole day, because they don't know how to do reflective, because our culture doesn't promote it. I know, which is one of the reasons I just tend to be, and Stella's going, yeah. It's one of the reasons I tend to be on a bit of a mission with this. And the more bridges I can build with magazines and publishers to get them to publish this kind of thing, the happier I am. As it happens, Darling Kindersley came to me, but now I've gone back to them with a book project, which will be on the dawning of the age of Aquarius, which is a very real thing. And in fact, what we're doing right now is part of that dawning, because we could not have done this in this electronic way even 2 years ago. Zoom didn't even exist. But the idea of people coming together to exchange spiritual awareness, that too is so new. And that's part of the dawning of the age of Aquarius, both using technology to come together to talk in a transformative way. Now, 3 years ago, you had to be reading the Evening Standard on the underground to have it happen. Now, hey, look at us. And we're coming from all kinds of different places in the world together to share this experience. This is the new era. So that's another part of astrology, where in the past, the job of astrology was to predict what was going to happen. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Nostradamus, the famous Nostradamus. He was chillingly accurate. And he was interesting because he was a Jew who was born in France that was under the Inquisition. And so he was called Nostradamus, as in our mother, as in the Christian name. But he was a Jew, and he actually studied medicine at a Jewish university in Egypt and then came back. So he was a qualified doctor. And he knew astrology. And of course, Catherine de Medici was his, Catherine Medici was his client. But he was also, because he was a doctor, he, at the time he was alive, was the best known plague doctor in all of Europe. I knew his biographer well. And so the role of the astrologer then was just to say what your destiny was, because people's lives didn't have that much freedom. So for Catherine de Medici, she didn't have a lot of choice. For the king, Henry the maybe fifth, who Nostradamus predicted would be, are you ready, killed because of a sword coming through his helmet on the playing field into his eye. Exactly what happened. Yeah. So basically quite accurate, but not a lot of free will in life. Nowadays, it's become a very different story. And while I am the astrologer, what I'm doing with each of you is saying, read your chart. And if you don't like what it says, change it. You got energy. You got vision. You got power. Say, oh, well, yeah, I kind of get that part of me exists. But, you know, I'm kind of not vibing with that. Go change it. Defy me. Defy the planets. This is the difference. Increasingly, it's been discovered that we can, and this is not a newsflash, we know this, and I'm sure you guys especially, because I have no doubt Stella has had someone come along and talk to you about this. You can improve your immune system with how you think and how you live. I mean, literally positive thinking improves your immune system. It's just a fact. They didn't know from immune systems 500 years ago, 50 years ago. Now think of every area of your life where you have more power. So astrology becomes not your destiny being told, but a jumping off point. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to actually chat with you about this, because have you read it is one thing. Have you read it and think some things and go, yeah, I get that. But to read other things, say, no, I get that. Well, either you don't get it and you need some time to think about it, or maybe it's like you don't get it and you don't want that to be part of your life, and you're actually going to change that. And if you do that, I would just be so delighted to hear about what you do, because what it means is that chart was a jumping off point for personal transformation. And these days, that's what it's about. Now, I'm going to leap ahead from the chart thing, and because you're typing questions for me, and I'll do that in a minute. But I'm going to leap ahead to what's happening now in this era, because the extraordinary year we're having may not seem like it, but this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's like, wait a minute, that was a song and they were dancing and singing. We can't even go out of the house. Yeah. Okay, I get that. But stay with me with this one. What's happening now is that our lives have been turned upside down. Our habit patterns have been broken. God knows the way we dress has changed. I haven't worn proper shoes for weeks. And actually, for you guys that put on makeup, woo, shows how special you are to me. What's happened, however, though, is all of society has had to stop. Stop the spending, stop the eating out, stop, sorry, Stella, the holidays, stop all of those behaviors, which are in large part ways of distracting ourselves from our true feelings. We have had to live with ourselves and sometimes family members and the mirror you look in, but also the psychological mirror, and go, I don't like this. And when we go back to work, many people will be changed people with changed lives. Now I'm going back to the general astrology. And this is something that I will be speaking and writing about a lot. I showed you the chart, say for Jacinda. This is the day she was born. There is a chart for today and tomorrow and every day. And as the planets move through the heavens, astrologers write about it. In about 3 weeks' time, there's an incredibly rare planetary setup. Over the past year, Jupiter, which is the planet of growth and development and expansion, and Saturn, which is the planet of order, structure, government, business, have been together in the sign Capricorn, which is the sign of structure, government, business, practicality. And they have been sandwiching a planet called Pluto. Now, Pluto is the planet of the dark god. It's a dark god. Has to do with the underworld, with our unconscious. Nothing having to do with that going on now. And with a death, things that kill you, death and transformation. It is the classic planetary setup for a virus, for a pandemic. They've been together like this. In the middle of December, first Saturn and then Jupiter move away from Pluto. And they move into, are you ready? The sign of Aquarius, as in the dawning of. December 17th and 19th, mark it in your diary. Or read my column. Yeah. Now, I reckon this is going to be the end of this. And I'm not remotely saying this in the press, but make a note. I think the virus is actually just going to fall off a cliff. I think it's going to stop replicating. But what it is also about is us taking the new perceptions about values in life that we have developed during this period, but doing it real differently. Really, really differently. Less stuff, more generosity. Less doing just to be doing, more doing to be enriched. Less hanging out with someone because we knew them 30 years ago, more being with who we care about. More developing ourselves, less watching that black box in the room. That's happened a little bit, but this turning point, it's an extraordinarily rare planetary setup. It really does indicate the beginning of a new era. And this is why Darlene Kinders was asked me to write about it. I have to write really fast. So I feel like I'm talking to you because the book's going, sitting there going, me. But you've had the heads up about it. So what I've done here is taken you on a journey from looking at general astrology to looking at your chart, which I hope you've ordered, and now you understand why. Now, also, by the way, you can order your spouse's chart, kid's chart, but understand if you're reading your spouse's chart, it's written for them, it's not for you. So if you're reading and you're saying, well, I don't think they'll like it, it's like, it doesn't matter what you think, it's actually meant for them. Yeah, sorry, same thing for kids. But there is a children's chart, which is really useful because it is written in a way for the parent to read it. And I'll just, it sounds like advertising, it is a little bit. But a friend of mine who was a godfather to his friends, 2 kids, gave the mother the chart of the children when he became godparent for each. And they're printed out like I showed you. And she read it and she put them aside. And then about 4 years later, when the kids were at 4 or 5, she read them. And she said they were so accurate, she wept. Yeah, that's an amazing thing, isn't it? So that's one of the reasons when Stella and I were talking about this, that I wanted to talk to you about it, because it's a wonderful tool. But at this time in particular, when the divine has decided to sit us all down and say, y'all have a think here about yourselves, you know, you're like not getting out to run around. And I wanted you to have this tool because it is that. Not everything will make sense. Some of it will make you annoyed. Some of it will make you really angry. If it does good, that's probably something you need to think about. If you do a partners, understand it's not written for you to read about them or to them, by the way. If you do kids, however, it's very useful, even if the kids are growing up. But in every case, it's not about a fixed reality. It's about your journey and you discovering your power, which was not the case with astrology even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. The difference? The single word consciousness. Being aware. And before I start looking at the questions, I'm going to just say one thing, which isn't so much about astrology, although it is in the sense of the Aquarian age coming, and about healing the planet. Scientists love saying, basically, ruin the ocean, atmosphere gone, screwed up agriculture. You know, you've kind of heard that version of things. Okay, get the plastic out of the ocean. And in fact, I understand that there is now a way to retrieve it and make it into useful plastic. But the scientific version is, no, you've killed the ocean. But then scientists don't do healing. They don't have the concept of consciousness because consciousness isn't something you can weigh and measure. As I hold my hands up, I'm going to show you this hand here. You can see that hand? It's an ordinary hand. And those of you who are in the palm reading, you can tell all about me. But the reason I'm showing you is I slipped in a friend's kitchen some years ago. And she'd been cooking and I caught myself on a red hot burner. And I'd studied spirituality a lot. And she said, oh my God. I said, take a deep breath, just give me some ice. And I put on my hand and I said, divine, please heal this. The next day, there wasn't even the tiniest pucker, and there has been no sign of the burn ever. That's consciousness. Yes, I know healing. So I know how to use that energy. Imagine us doing that with the ocean. And then in the nicest possible way, we can say to the scientists who are saying, it's all done, you can't fix it. Let us show you how we can. And that is your power, individually and as a group. And that takes me back to why I wanted to talk to you about astrology, because in the old form, it's like, this is how you are. And it's like buying into the sales, no exchanges, no returns. This is it. Nowadays, it's a journey. And just as what you're reading about is your journey, just as if Prince Harry had read this 5 years ago, I would have said, never happening. And it did. In your case, if you want something to happen in your life or want to heal the planet, you have the power. And if it's not in your chart, defy me in the stars and go for it anyway, because you have that power too. So I think on that note, I will end and take any questions we have. How do
Shelley, can I just amalgamate those questions for you to make it easy for you there? Because one that's coming up a lot is about not having the time of birth. That's come up 3 times in these questions.
Yes.
And not having the accurate time of birth. How does that affect the accuracy of your personal chart?
It makes it a little less specific, but not as much. I mean, and because in the United Kingdom, it's not on birth certificates, annoyingly. And so, but it's still, in fact, I'll just end up Arden. I don't have the time. And what we do is we make it for, this is the symbol for the sun, and that's sunrise. And so it makes it very, very accurate. The only thing that you don't know is what is called the rising sign. And the only time that it makes any difference is if someone is born just when the sun is moving from one sign to another. In fact, it's a funny, brief story. My very first editor at the Sunday Times was Andrew Neil, quite a character. And his assistant editor, who's the one who brought me in, said, let's give him a chart, as like a starting gift. And if any of you know about him, I mean, he is a presence, shall we say. And he was a presence in the newsroom and a presence on media. But he was born between Taurus and Gemini. And so I said, well, I'd have him ask family, what time baby came. And if we believed his brother, he was a Gemini. If we believed his uncle, he was a Taurus. And that's so typical of Andrew Neil, because why would he be any one sign when he could be 2? So the other part of it is you don't kind of really need to be that, because the rest of it is you anyway. It's a real Andrew Neil story, only he could be so unconsciously rambunctious that we never knew. So he's both.
Great, thank you. The other question we have here is about the ascendant, actually. I mean, the fact that the time of birth will have an impact on you. How important is your ascending sign? Because one of the things I always used to wonder is reading my, and Jane, I'll tell you here now, my Gemini horoscope on the tube was like, how can every Gemini be having the same message as me? And then when I started to delve into the personal charts, and I found that my personal ascendant was Cancer, and I started to understand myself a little bit better around that. But how important is it?
Okay, well, it's a bit like, saying American. But I'm an American who God just had that sense of humor. So I was born in Hollywood, which is completely different from a New Yorker, but we're both Americans, which is also different from a Texan, but we're all Americans, which is also different from Chicago, but we're all Americans, or a Brit. If someone's a Brit and they're born in London, or they're a Brit, and notice I say Brit, so we could include someone from Scotland. Well, they're still a Brit, but so what it is it refines stage by stage. And the rising sign or ascendant, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with this logo, there's 12 signs during the day. So for instance, at the moment, the sun is for about 15 minutes still in the sign of Scorpio. So, okay, here's your astrology lesson for the day. Are you ready for this one? Take a deep breath. At the time the sun rises in the sign of Scorpio, what do you think the rising sign is? Scorpio. And then 2 hours later, it's the next sign, which is Sag. 2 hours later, it's the next sign, which is Capricorn. So the chart is a 24-hour clock. And the rising sign, if you have that, is a mirror of your physical body, how you present yourself. But if you're born with the sun in the sign of Scorpio, you are that. And the other thing that it shows, and again, looking at Jacinta's chart, because I didn't have her birth time, all of the other planets are powerful influencers too. The rising sign only does have to do, it's associated with your physical body, your personality, how you come across in the world. So it's one component of several, but not essential at all. And as I said, in England, because it isn't a matter of legal record, many British people don't know. Actually, and this is it's a slight digression, but it's just such a funny story. I was, for a couple of years in the Evening Standard and ES Magazine, I was doing profiles of people in the news. And one was Pamela Harriman, who had been married to Churchill's son, who then died. She's really good at marrying rich men. And then she married someone else. And then she married this very rich guy, Harriman, who then died. And then, although she was a Brit, she managed to get appointed as the American ambassador to Paris. Quite a personality. And so I was writing her profile, and she, like Andrew Neil, was on the between two signs, in fact, Taurus and Gemini. So I thought, well, I'll just call her office, and calling from the newspaper, call the embassy. And so I spoke to her secretary and said, I'm from the Evening Standard. I really like to, I'm doing a profile, and ambassadors, Her Excellency. Her Excellency's birth time is not known. Could you ask her? And this very, very American accent said, well, I don't know what she'll have to say, but I'll get back to you. And in about an hour, I got a call back from her secretary who said, Her Excellency said she thought she was born when the milkman came. Well, you kind of understand why she was so popular and such a good diplomat. But also, that's slightly to take the thing off of really having to know your birth time. She didn't. So, other questions? Oh, okay,
yeah.
wait. Let me just
there's one. This is quite an interesting question. Has the interpretation of the individual planets' influence been constant through the centuries? From Chrissy.
Yes and no. And see, this is the arc of this. It's a really interesting one because, again, the idea of consciousness. Because the fact is, people born 500 years ago, 400 years ago, 300 years ago didn't have a lot of choice. You were born in the place you were born in, the culture you were born in, the religion you were born in the gender you were born in. And unless you were pretty extraordinary, it wasn't negotiable. And we could say that the ones who got up off their duff and left were had that very special kind of nature and chart. And remember, I think the chart reflects your nature. I think the soul comes in at a time that mirrors their nature. So I don't think that the chart makes you be that way. It's a mirror. It's like, honestly, it's like looking in the mirror and going to the mirror. My goodness, you're making me look bad because I drank too much last night. Excuse me. So the chart's a mirror of what your soul chose.
Yeah. I've got to say, sorry to interrupt. I've got to say, when I read my chart, what it does is it helps you understand yourself more. Yeah. And it allows you to delve into parts of your character, perhaps, that you don't really want to accept or it doesn't immediately resonate with you, but it's almost like a catalyst for you to self-develop more, to really get into that subconscious and go, oh gosh, that is actually me, and what can I do about that, rather than to just be oblivious to it, because most of us are oblivious, and it's not until someone puts that mirror up to you that you start to recognize that. I found that really powerful.
Yeah, and and thank you. And this is one of the reasons I do this, and in fact it's one of the reasons I'm in the nicest possible way pushy about it, because exactly, there are very few settings in which you have that handy mirror put in front of you, where, as you just modeled, where you go, oh, I suppose so. Yeah, but all of that oohing and ahhing that you go through is part of the journey of going from, well, it's not my fault, and they can't. The world keeps doing this to me. All of that. Why do I keep meeting people like that? It's like, then you go, oh, well, it could be that. Can I answer a question I saw fly by, which is an important one that comes up, and it's one that gets neglected, which someone who said their birthday is tomorrow, and which sign are they?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this very well-worn book, and you see it's never been used at all. And this is called an Ephemeris, and it's a old name. In fact, we use the word ephemeral, mean changing. And it's an ephemeris, and what it is, are you ready?
Oh, yuck.
It's a list of the planet's positions every 24 hours, and this is what we use. And before computers did it, I did charts by hand. Yes. So, the question about when your sign begins. And this is a tragedy of star sign columns, because you've got to choose. It's just midnight, but the sun and all the other planets, but the sun in terms of the star sign, changes signs at a different time and often a different date every year. And if you were born on what people call the cusp, which isn't really possible unless you're Pamela Harriman, then you are one or the other. And what you can do, if you know your birth time, is email my PA and we'll look it up for you. I need your birth date, time, and place, because the sun moves into the next sign. And this is from one sign to the other, but we're talking about Scorpio to Sag at the moment, at a specific hour. So like this year, and I realize whoever asked was not born this year. I know you weren't born yesterday, but you also weren't born this year. But just so you know how it works. So we're looking at the pages for November here, and we see the sun moving into the sign of Sagittarius this year, not the year you were born, on the 21st at 2041 GMT. So this also has to do with where you were born. So if you were born in LA, then it's different. But it is a specific time, and it varies by hours and occasionally by a day. So the notion that it's consecutive midnights around the world like New Year's, not so simple. You need it, but basically you need me, because unless you're like total Virgo maniac, I've got to do it myself kind of thing.
Can you just what's the email address for Tracy to
PA
on your website? PA at SBS.
No, at ShelleyVonStrunkel.com.
Oh, okay.
Spelled out.
PA at ShelleyVonStrunkel.com. Okay. A couple of questions here about the planets and how to understand them. There was a couple of questions around Pluto and why is it the dark planet, and where can people go and find out about the differences in the planets? That's in the charts, I know that, but maybe you can expand on that.
It's a fascinating thing, because also if you've studied mythology at all, because they link, because basically these guys and gals, these Mercuries and Venuses, have been part of our life. And the fascinating thing is, in fact, I was just using this as an example for the piece I was writing for the Mail on Sunday. We use them in our language. We describe someone as mercurial. So the two Gemini heads of state are mercurial. Gemini is ruled by the planet Mercury. Duh, from central casting, I know exactly. I see the faces I see here going, oh yeah. Venus. Okay, Venus rules the sign Taurus, and Libra. Venus. Venus as in Venusian, as in, and this is, in other languages, the root word Venus is used a lot, but in our language, about the only one I've found was venereal disease, which of course comes from exercising Venus a little bit too much. But she's also Aphrodite. And this is the other part of it. And if you haven't read about gods and goddesses, it's good to go at it from that, because the heavenly bodies all represent that. And then you go to Mars, and of course you've got martial arts, duh. And Mars is the red planet. This is the planet of pure energy. And when used properly, it's all about getting there. It's interesting to note, and this was actually on the radio during the Olympics. There's one Olympics and they were doing the running, and the announcer there obviously fed all those time-filling stuff. And the announcer said that on one day, there were 5 Olympic champions in running. It was the same day of Aries, which is the sign of competition. I rest my case. But this isn't just competition on the track. These are the people, the go-getters, the people who make things happen. And often not the presidents, because they don't have the patience to let other people do things, but the entrepreneurs and the athletes. And so Mars is said to rule Aries. Now the relationship was formed by the seasons. So Mars, Jupiter, which is a planet of growth and development. And Jupiter, of course, if you ever look in the heavens, Jupiter is like the planet that won't disappear. It's like, I'm here, love me. And it's the biggest one and bright. And so it's about expansion. And the god Jupiter was that expansion, like the children with that woman and then that woman too. And the promise made and not kept. If there's a character that is the darker side of Jupiter, it's Falstaff. Do you have any Falstaff? No. Yes. In Shakespeare's play, the one who is always disappointing people is Falstaff. Someone will remember and say, so Jupiter's about expansion and promises. Now remember, I mentioned Jupiter and Saturn, which I'm going to say in a minute, being together at the moment and moving together into the sign of Aquarius. Saturn is the dark god in the sense of being the rather joyless element, joyless but dutiful element of life. And remember, these were gods who were viewed as gods before humanity started looking at the planets. And so they saw these as components of our nature as beings. And so Saturn is deep and dark and practical, not evil, but practical and a teeny bit joyless. But it's all about duty. It's associated with the sign Capricorn and was associated with Aquarius until Uranus was discovered, about which in a minute, because it's a great story. But this is about duty. And the number of Capricorn, Saturn ruled business clients I have, it's just amazing. They basically run the world. The Geminis run the world in a noisy way. The Capricorns, the Saturn ruled Capricorns, do it very quietly. And you asked about Pluto, but I'm first going to tell you about Uranus because it's such an interesting story. Okay, for all of history, we have only had the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, end of discussion. In 1784, a guy was sitting in his garden in Bath, and he was actually German, but he'd come here, and he was a composer who was an astronomer as a hobby. And he built, as you did in those days, his own telescope. Haven't you built yours? And so he's sitting in his garden in Bath looking, and he saw what he thought was a comet. And so he asked a colleague to come look and said, look, I found a comet. He said, hey guy, it doesn't have a tail. It's not a comet. You've discovered a planet. He said, no. He said, yeah, no tail, no comet, planet. Well, it took him about a week to be convinced. And then they went to the Royal Astronomical Society, went, you've discovered a planet. Now, This was the first planet discovered in history. We had the same lot I just described. And this guy in his garden and bath, thank you very much, with his homemade telescope, discovered a new planet. So Uranus, which it ended up being called, is the planet of, guess what? Innovation, new things. And it rules the sign of Aquarius, as in the dawning of. How cool is that story? It's just so amazing. And oh, by the way, and he worked very closely with his sister who helped. So it's both genders coming together, which was the beginning of women getting some kind of freedom. Next planet was Neptune, which was discovered in 1846. And it was discovered in a more routine way because, of course, telescopes were routinely used. And then the planet most recently discovered, Pluto, was discovered in 1930. And it was actually discovered with a radio telescope because it's so far out that at the time they couldn't actually get a picture of it, although we now have them. And Pluto it's an interesting component because it's humanity owning its dark side. Pluto is the god of the underworld. The same year Pluto was discovered is the same year the first atomic bomb was blown up. It's the year that the mob began to take over. Now that doesn't sound good, but what it is, it's the beginning of humanity beginning to discover that darker power, which is what we've been having to live with and work with global terrorism, with the terrorism we sometimes have in our own minds. Pluto is currently in the sign of Capricorn, which has to do with big business, but also government. It remains there until 2024, I think. I keep forgetting, sorry, I have to look it up. And during the period it's there, it is teaching all of us to look at government differently. It moves into the sign of Aquarius as in the dawning of in 2024. Yes, I do not speak in 2024. So it's the most recently discovered planet, but it's about us discovering the dark side within us, which is a really hard thing to do. But you know that thing, well, I hate it when people think that way. And then you have to go, oh, me hating something when they think a way I disapprove of. That's not exactly doing my vibe any favors, is it? So how do I fix that? With love? You're asking a lot here. And that's what this period is about. And it's beginning to discover that. And let me go back to the thing with the ocean and healing the ocean. And the sign is saying, no, you've ruined it all. And poor old Greta is just getting mad at everybody, which has got it attention. But now here's a news flash for all of you. And that's kind of the thing, because Pluto is also about the collective, as is the Aquarian age. So each of you has in your mind and in your soul the power to heal. This then means that if every time you read something about the ocean is screwed, the atmosphere is screwed, you just quietly say, I'm sending you healing. If someone says it's all over, don't argue with them, but just say, well, some people think differently. I have a different take on it. Don't allow the thought to sit there without just simply saying, other energy. If you start arguing, then you go to Mars and you argue. No, you just use your own mental energy for healing. And you can also, when you walk outside, go to the sky and say, you're gorgeous and you're so strong and healed. If you see a picture of the ocean or live near it, you can say, I send you healing. Your healing power is as big as anybody's. Yeah. There are all these people on the internet who go, and that's good stuff. They're media healers. You have just as much power as anyone. So the last three, well, the point of this ramble is the last three planets were about us discovering our power. And that began with a guy in his garden discovering a planet with a telescope on his own. And it shows just what we can discover. So just think, if you had your mental telescope, you could discover something that would benefit the planet in some way that we haven't even thought of yet. Hey, it's not a bad thing. So you asked about those planets, and thank you for asking. And I hope that that has answered your question, because it's an exciting thing. And we're recording this too, yes?
Yes, we're recording. Yeah.
Any other questions?
There's a question about Chiron. I always thought Chiron was like the planet of the wounded healer. I'm not really sure what that means.
It's not a planet. It's an asteroid.
Oh, it's
and
okay.
yeah. And some people really are into the asteroids. I'm not. And not that I dismiss it at all, but in my experience, just working with the planets is fine. And it is associated with that. But there now, I mean, a lot of astrologers use 20 asteroids. And it's just, so I honestly can't make an educated comment on it because I don't use it.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. You were correct about full staff. Ivonica has has confirmed that. Friend of
it is full staff.
So very good, very good. And then we'll just take one final question here from Sophie about. She's been told that if you're born in the year when Jupiter was in Gemini, big changes are ahead next year. Is that right?
No.
No.
I mean, it's not no. It's like that single fact alone isn't. I don't know what she was reading or told, but it's much more complex than that. And I also, this is where I kind of pull back from big changes will come, because with what I've said, if ever there was a time when we can use our consciousness to make changes, it's now and next year. So let's pull back from a few Jupiters in Gemini and just pull back and say, with Jupiter and Uranus moving into the sign of Aquarius, as in the dawning of the age of, every human being has a power for change, and for change that will, no, I'm not saying positive, because I'm not doing positive and negative, that change that will bring benefits of some kind to you and to the planet. And know that. And so if you see something where you kind of contract and go, oh, just bless it.
Yeah.
You have just as much power as any big deal who is all over the internet.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is about believing that your consciousness is powerful. And I think a lot of people haven't quite got there yet, because we feel that only things are powerful once we move into action, where we actually do things, rather than, as you say, bless or think, or, just, and I think when people understand how powerful their consciousness is, it's like a light bulb goes on. And if most of the world understood that, we would be much more powerful as a human race in a more beneficial way, as you say. So thank you for endorsing that. It's a big leap for many people, because they just can't see that. We've never been taught that. We've never been, it's just.
Well, we haven't been taught that we're powerful anyway. Can I, there is, in fact, you may know about this, I'll find out the information. There's a Japanese scientist who has experimented with water. Do you know about this experimentation?
Yes.
And he has said nice things to water and then frozen it, and then said horrible things to water and frozen it, and the patterns are completely different. And it was just him. And it might be something interesting for you to share with your group. And there's a book with pictures on it, which shows it was only his thoughts, his beautiful water, and the water makes these gorgeous patterns when frozen. And your horrible water, and it would like a. So, thought is power, and we're moving into the Aquarian age, and that is the theme. So, let me just say quickly also, again, if anyone has questions, please either come through Stella or email my PA if there are further questions. If you want to order charts, you know how to do that. If you want to make an appointment, it would be my pleasure. And I do keep it very private. So like, don't put it like up on the card in, the grocery store. Just, but it is important to do that. And if you want information on stuff to read, also, I'd be delighted to give you information if you want to know more about astrology.
Thank you, Shelley, and perhaps feed that through to me. We'll send that with the recording, maybe some of your recommendations for further reading. That would be brilliant. I've just got to say a huge thank you for you for giving us your time and your infinite wisdom here about this subject. It's just so fascinating, and also just endorsing these very important principles, you know, that we've talked about. Just for everyone, I think Shelley's charts and her book are a great Christmas present. I'm going to use it myself actually as Christmas present. So just a little push for Shelley, and they're very affordable. It's a lovely gift, very personalised, and I'll be spending time reading my own chart over and over. I still keep going back to it. So thank you for your time. A fabulous session.